This is Jerry Green from the Pacific Council. I am delighted to be talking to you from Oslo, Norway, at the home of Ambassador Marc Nathanson, the former co-chair of our board and a long and dear friend of the Pacific Council. Generally, we send delegations to visit our ambassadors, and since I was here, I thought, what a unique opportunity to actually meet with the ambassador in person. We have a huge number of people on this Zoom session. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and then we will turn it over to you, and you can ask your own questions. Let me give a little bit of an introduction to Ambassador Nathanson, just to put his current position in broader context. As you know, he's the former co-chair of our board. He's a longtime member of the board of the National Democratic Institute, a longtime member of the board of the Aspen Institute. He was head of the Broadcasting Board of Governors for 7 years under both Republican and Democratic presidents, which is rather unusual, and was involved with Radio Free Europe, Radio Marti, and much of the broadcasting that, or all of the broadcasting that the U.S. did globally. He was Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's nominee to be on the board of the East-West Center, which is based in Honolulu, which deals with Asia issues. And in addition to being a successful business person, has had a long career of public service. So I want to welcome all of you. I can't welcome the ambassador to his own home, but I can thank him for joining us. I saw Jane last night, Marc's wife, which was a real treat as well. And Marc, thank you so much for meeting with your fellow members. I'd like to start. I know where we are. Tell people where we are now. This in and of itself is an interesting story. So
we're in a home that all of you own, assuming you're American citizens. This is a home owned by the United States. It was built in 1911 by a noted Norwegian architect whose last name was Boll. And he did many historical buildings, including the National Theater. The U.S. bought it, I think, in the 20s, and they paid $150,000. And it caused a big scandal because that was the most we ever paid for a resident. At the time, it was both the consul and the residents. And now it's just the residents. We have a fairly new embassy built in 2017. We moved from downtown out into the country, about 10 to 15 minutes from here, depending on traffic. And that's where the embassy is. We have about 260 people, including our military attachés and people from different services, commerce, etc., who are based there. But we're actually in the residence. As I say, it's historical, both to Norway and the United States. It's one of the 12 residents in the United States that have been designated as historical because of when they were built and so forth. It's 30,000 square feet. It was on 5 acres. It's down to 2 acres because in 1929, we sold off the US 3 acres. And thus we have a lot of apartment buildings built around us since that time. We're near the center of Oslo, about 12 minutes. But we're in the first suburb. So this is kind of like Hancock Park to those of you in Los Angeles, the area that we're in right now. But this is a very historic home.
And for you, so you snowflakey Southern Californians, it's nippy. It was below freezing last night, and it shot up to be in the low 40s. So it's a little chilly. Let me start, Ambassador Nathanson. First, how would you characterize U.S.-Norwegian relations? You showed up. You know, your job is to manage this relationship, to nurture it. How would you characterize the relations? What are the main issues?
Well, first of all, it's a very unique relationship. It's a very, very special relationship, and a lot of us on the West Coast don't know enough about it. And even in talking to government leaders who have a lot of contacts with people in Washington and Boston and other places, they are not as well known. Norway is not as well known on the West Coast, even though the Crown Prince, the future King of Norway, is a graduate of Berkeley, of Cal. So obviously he knows a lot about it. And when I presented my credentials on June 17th, I think, to the king, he reminded me that the first language that he spoke as a young boy was English, because as some of you have seen Atlantic Crossing and other shows, the king, his two sisters and his mother lived in the White House under President Roosevelt. So he gave protection when the Nazis invaded in 1940 Norway, and he lived there. They eventually moved to a home in Maryland, provided by the United States and the Norwegian government. His father and grandfather, then king, were in London leading the resistance. But there's a very, very unique and special relationship going back to World War II between Norway and the United States. And I would just say today, with today's military, with today's intelligence community, Norway is in a class very few other countries where we share intelligence and we have high confidence in the information that we share with Norway and Norway shares with us.
Let me ask you about the Arctic, which is of considerable geopolitical significance with Russia, also with China. What's the U.S. perspective on the Arctic, and what's the nature of our dealings with Norway on Arctic issues?
When I went through confirmation, which is many of you know, and Jane and I say hello to all of our friends in Los Angeles and on the West Coast. It's a very long process. In it, I met many Democrat and Republican senators and their staff. There's a tremendous increased interest in the Arctic by senators, not just from Alaska, which you would assume, but from many other states. And the reason is the Arctic is critical to not only global warming and what's going on with our planet, but the transportation routes of the future. As the ice is melting, as Jerry mentioned, China, it takes 6 days to bring goods from China to Europe via the Arctic, assuming there are passage depending on the ice, versus 12 days to go around Suez the other way. More importantly, of course, now with the unprovoked war by Putin in Ukraine, Russia has a major presence in the Arctic. Siberia is in the Arctic. They are a big, big player. The problem is the Arctic Council, which is a group that was formed to make the Arctic peaceful, to make it non-military, which Russia was part of with 6 other nations, including the United States, Canada, obviously Sweden and Finland, etc. They have now at a standstill because Russia is isolated. The 6 other nations have all condemned Russia for Ukraine, but the Second Fleet of Russia, the submarines, are all up on the Kola Peninsula on the Arctic. So it is critical for the United States, for Norway, for NATO to monitor this. And I think Sweden and Finland joining NATO will really be an important solidification of what we call here in Norway the High North, the northern flank of NATO, because it's bordering Norway, 121 miles, but a much larger border with Finland.
And so there's a 120-mile border between Norway and Russia.
Yes.
So that brings the United States, because of our mission, closer to the problems. And do we have any facilities outside of Oslo? Any diplomatic representation and consulates, or what? We
have only the one consulate in Oslo with, as I said, around 260 people in it today. But we have applied in seeking permission from the Norwegian government to really start our first consulate in Tromsø, which is in the high north, the largest city. There's a major university there as well. That's where the Arctic Council is also based. And so we hope to get permission as well as funding from Congress. It's totally supported by the State Department and the leadership of the State Department and the president to put a council in Tromsø in the Arctic, because again, to show the importance that the Arctic has, not just today, but in the future, not just in global warming, but enormous amounts of minerals and other items are affected and are present in the Arctic today. But the big concern is, as Jerry pointed out, Russia itself and Russia's behavior.
I'd like to talk about energy cooperation. I mean, Norway is a major producer of energy, but its conservation policies are remarkably ahead of their time. That's certainly my impression. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that Jane and I found in moving here is to see the consciousness of a major energy power. The only major energy country in Europe is Norway. Russia was the largest producer of gas for Europe until Ukraine. Norway was second. And today, Norway is the largest and only European country that has considerable gas as well as oil reserves. But what Norway has done since the discovery by American companies in cooperation with the Norwegian government, the oil and gas industry, is the development of green technology, particularly hydro, which is most of the electricity here is hydro, and also wind. And a lot of this is being done not just in Norway, but in other countries, including the United States. Equinor, which is the largest energy company in Norway, public company, but partially owned by the Norwegian government, is spending a lot of money, I think over 700 million a year, in developing wind and other energy sources in the United States, just to give you an example. So they're very conscious of it here. 70% of all cars in Norway are electric. Tesla, you see more Teslas here than you see in Los Angeles. And this is a small country. This only has 5.5 million people, but there's a lot of Teslas here. You do not see plastic. You see, instead of plastic forks, wooden forks. People are very conscious of conservation and working on new technologies in the conservation and energy space.
The other thing that, I mean, this is interesting, and Jane confirmed it last night. She said that, I can't remember, when she moved here, she converted $300 US into local currency, and she still has $270. Is this a cashless society? And where did that come from, and what does it mean?
Norway, also Finland and Sweden and Denmark, by the way, are really cashless societies. You don't use cash here. It's very different than Los Angeles. One of our experiences, we went to a local restaurant, which food is terrific here. Farm to the table, the seafood is very fresh and delicious. And we went to a local restaurant, by the way, called Michael's, having nothing to do with Michael's in Santa Monica. And we had a very nice meal, and the waiter came over, and I gave him a cash tip of 200 kroner, $20. He said, no, that's not necessary. And he didn't take the tip. Where in Los Angeles, where in New York, Chicago, anywhere has a waiter refused a tip? The waiters get paid a salary here. They do not rely on the tips. So if people do tip, it's usually 5% of the bill. It of course is included in the bill, as in many countries in Europe, but it's a very different attitude towards service and so forth. Remember, if you're a Norwegian citizen, you are taxed highly, even though those of us in California are very highly taxed too, nearly 50% of the income. But in Norway, you get a lot of benefits that we do not get in California. Free education all the way through college and graduate school, free medical, housing. There is no homeless in Oslo. Big contrast to American cities. So it's socialist, you can say. I could say it's the wealth coming from oil and gas. Norway is the wealthiest country in Europe. It's surpassed Luxembourg, which was a banking center. But they've used their wealth not for a few individuals or a few industries, but to better the life of people who live here.
They, as I recall, they have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia or Qatar or the UAE.
And they don't talk about it.
No, I didn't hear that here. I read it.
Unlike Los Angelenos, no, unlike American, are very reluctant to brag, to talk, to show off. You don't see that here. People are much more equal, friendly. I'm shocked by how courteous the drivers are. No one honks their horn here.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, you know, is Americans were always eager to share and impart to others. We're not always as quick to learn from others simply because, you know, we're the United States. So that's why I'm asking these questions. What about COVID? I have not seen anybody wearing a mask since I've been here. Is COVID, you know, an issue, or are people getting vaccinated? Are there anti-vaxxers here the way there are in the US?
Even though there are multiple political parties here, the governments are coalition of different parties. Labor Party is currently in power. The Conservatives were in power for 8 years before. There isn't much difference in foreign policy. People are very unified. They're very supportive of the government. So when COVID first occurred, and obviously I was not here, the government promoted all adults to get vaccinated. 98% of all adults did that. They follow the government, they follow the healthcare. Now there's some negatives too. I'm talking about all the positive. There are negatives. If you go to a pharmacy here, you cannot find Tylenol. They have aspirin, but because the state controls the healthcare system, they buy. So they buy only particular brands. There's no Crest toothpaste here, only Colgate, because that's what the state decided to buy or they got the best deal on. So there are some differences as far as choice is concerned. And for those of you in Los Angeles, in the liquor business, it's all state controlled here. It's like Utah. The stores are there. They're state controlled. On Sunday, there's no alcohol available in grocery stores or anywhere else.
I'd like to ask a Ukraine question. Finland and Sweden just recently joined NATO, and you know, for that to actually unwind is going to take some time. Norway's been a long time member. Norway has a well-equipped. Actually, I'd like you tell us about the Norwegian military. Are they sending arms to Ukraine? Are there Norwegian advisors, you know, advising Ukrainians?
Norway, again, since the end of World War II, 1946, 1945, has been a close ally of the United States. They had troops in Afghanistan with us. If you look at the flags as we were leaving Afghanistan, there was both the American and the Norwegian flag because they were manning the hospital at the airport. They have been a steadfast ally of the United States through all of this. The Norwegian military is quite small, but it is very well equipped. And I must say, and I'm very proud of this, with American defense industry, they have the latest and best technology. And of course, they can pay for it. And so it is according to our military attaches, and at the embassy, we have 28 military people, both attaches and in other roles. They are very complimentary of the Norwegian military, their awareness, the latest technology that they have, but it is still very small. As Jerry said, Norway was an original member with the United States in NATO. Denmark is also in NATO. Iceland doesn't have a military force, even though they're part of Scandinavia. So the fact that Sweden and Finland are joining is going to be a big, big plus. And I think Norway has a critical role to help the other Scandinavian countries, the other Nordic countries in that transition to go from a private military force to be part of NATO.
One question I'd like to ask, which may sound a little, touchy-feely, but I think it would be of interest. What does your day look like? How do you, I don't mean this, you're idle, but, what do you do all day? What is it, we talk a lot about our members being ambassadors, but we really don't, except those of you who have been so honored to do it. What surprised you, and how do you spend your days?
Well, as many ambassadors on the Pacific Council have advised me prior to becoming an ambassador, whether it's Frank Baxter or Rock Schnabel or John Emerson, they've all given me great advice, but I still have found differences. I was not aware of how much ceremonial things you do as an ambassador, because you're representing the United States government, you're representing the president of the United States. So a lot of times they want you at an event or to cut a ribbon or to, as Jerry just, we talked about before, I spoke to members of parliament yesterday about American political happenings and the future. There's a lot of policy. My day is filled with meetings with our people at the embassy, but also meeting the 70 other ambassadors who are based here from other countries. And you say, well, why Norway, a small country, would have so many embassies? Well, Norway, next to the United States, and of course we have to look at it on a per capita basis, is one of the largest foreign aid givers, providers in the world, next to the United States. So they're very active in Africa and in other places, and thus many of those countries have embassies or consulates here and would seek more aid from Norway as well.
Yeah. Lastly, I just want to share this with last evening, Mark and Jane invited me to a dinner, and I met the Minister of Development for Norway, the Samantha Power. I don't know if she would say this, although they know one another. The head of AID, the person in charge of foreign aid for Norway.
Yes.
And I would be willing to bet they give a larger proportion of their budget to foreign aid than do we in the US. I didn't ask, but I'm fairly certain that's the case. And she had just flown in, she had just been in Ethiopia. And so Norway, again, the Oslo Accords were signed here in Norway. So this is a small country with a very, very big foreign policy.
And they take their role very seriously in the whole humanitarian effort, in gender equality, in many other issues around the world. And they're very serious about it. And I might say, talking to the legislators yesterday, they're very confused about the United States, recent Supreme Court rulings, and I'm now an ambassador. I'm nonpartisan. I know Rock's probably laughing at that, and I'm not making comments, but they were very surprised about how things have occurred in the United States, and the last administration, frankly, was a big surprise to them. And they're looking to the future, and they want to see the United States be a global concerned citizen and participate in NATO and in the other international institutions. Norway is not a member of the EU, even though it does a lot of trade with the EU. And part of that is because Norway has such a strong currency and such a strong financial situation. As Jerry said, they have the largest sovereign fund in the world. And this is a small country, but in 2020, the sovereign fund, and this was even prior to the oil and gas prices going up, made $160 billion in distributions in 2020 in 1 year. So that's a very multi-trillion-dollar sovereign fund.
One more question, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you to ask your questions. And we're sitting at a distance from the computer, so someone on our team in LA will actually field the questions and ask them to Ambassador Nathanson. Final question, which I always ask, and this is because of my obsession with global LA and global California. I just heard, by the way, I mentioned this to Ambassador Nathanson, that I've heard that California may be moving from having the 5th largest economy in the world to the 4th largest economy in the world. Have you seen opportunities for Norway-California relations? I've already told people here they ought to move the consulate to Los Angeles, where the action is from San Francisco. But everyone is so fascinated with California. Has that, have you as a Californian, has this come up at all?
I have seen in my short 4 months here, lots of opportunity for California business in Norway and vice versa. I think in particular, we need to have the Norwegians, who to us seem quite shy, participate. And the Minister of Trade, who is a very young, very entrepreneurial man, and I have talked about putting together some specific industry seminars where we can bring together people from the United States. And of course, I always think of California, entrepreneurs with Norwegian entrepreneurs, just to discuss new technologies in the green space, in the energy space, in the shipping business, in other areas. A lot of times we don't know. Most of you probably do not know, when I was in Bergen, that the weather on all the weather channels, on all the news comes from Norway. The company is a spinoff of TV2, and they actually produce and have the technology, because of the shipping industry really is how it was developed, that they predict the weather throughout the world, and they sell their services to all the media.
That's so interesting. I'm going to open it up for questions. Sam and Valerie, do you want to have questions? Are there questions you can share with Ambassador Nathanson?
Yes. Excuse me. Our first question is from Kara Wagner, and she asks, is Russia's attack on Ukraine affecting Norway?
Definitely. It's a prime concern of Norway. As many of you know, the Secretary General, the head of NATO, is Norwegian, former Prime Minister, former Foreign Minister. It is critical. Norway traditionally never sent arms. They sent financial aid, but never sent arms in a conflict throughout the world. NATO is the first exception to that. They've actually sent arms and superior arms through NATO to Ukraine. And they have continued to do that besides financial aid. It has had a major effect. It's a major concern. It is hard, even though we told the Norwegians, the Russians, were going to invade Ukraine. Many people doubted that in and out of government here. They have very active think tanks, which Jerry is participating in meeting with. And they are very, very concerned about Putin and about the future of Ukraine. And it is affecting not only Norway, but all of Europe. And it puts Norway in a very precarious position as the only supplier outside of the United States and the Middle East and other countries to gas to Europe. And that puts a lot of pressure, because they can only increase production to a certain amount, like 7 to 10%. So they just can't meet all the needs of Germany, Italy, Spain, all the other countries.
I would recommend to all of you a Netflix show called Occupied, which is sadly could almost be a training film. It's so, I won't reveal anything, but if you want to see an interesting perspective on Norway, watch Occupied on Netflix. The other is, as the ambassador mentioned, Atlantic Crossing, which is on PBS, which is also really terrific. Sam, next question, please.
Tim Noonan would like to ask, can you tell us about the Russian strategic bombers in Olenja this past week? Apologies for pronunciation.
Did you say Tim Noonan?
Yes, Tim Noonan.
Or Tim Noonan?
I'm surprised Tim's question isn't about insurance rates in Norway. So I'm a little confused that he's interested in bombing in the Ukraine. Oh, of course, Tim probably is insuring the power plants in Ukraine. Of course, I should have thought of that. What Putin is doing, today, and we can all look at this, and I'm saying this not just as an ambassador, but as an American citizen, and someone living in Europe is Putin is going after the energy sources in Ukraine. And they are with drones and with long-range missiles trying to attack the infrastructure to weaken the resistance. I think just the opposite is happening with the Ukrainians, who have shown great bravery. But this is a course of action. And as long as Russia can control the skies of Ukraine, that they are able to do this almost at will.
Thank you. Sam, next one.
Barry Porter would like to know, is Norway experiencing any rise in populism and nationalism as troubling is continuing to happen in other parts of Europe?
Not quite the same in Norway, but there is some movement. That Norwegians have great pride in themselves. And the way that I kind of tell the story, and I apologize to all my Swedish friends on the phone of Swedish ancestry, is Norwegians were like the poor cousins who came to Thanksgiving dinner at the rich cousin's house, and they were grateful to be there, and they had a nice Thanksgiving dinner. And a few years later, the tables turned. The poor cousins became the 10 times richer cousins than their Swedish neighbors. And there's a sense of pride in that. There's also a sense of skepticism. The Norwegians are very united in that, and in a way that's a populist movement, but it's not directed toward the government. The government, no matter what the party, is quite popular. The king here, even though it's a constitutional monarchy and the king has more ceremonial power, but 84% of the Norwegian public supports a monarchy. So it shows you the popularity of this in the sense of pride. And some of that goes back to World War II as well.
Sam, next one.
The next question is from Victor King, who said, what do they think of January 6th in the US? And I believe they in this context is Norwegians.
Norwegians.
The Norwegians I have talked to were very shocked by it. And frankly, very surprised that this would happen in the United States. And it has shaken up not just Norway, but many of our close allies. And Norway is really one of our closest allies. And the most troubling questions I got from members of parliament who are very pro-American is, how can we count on America in the future? What's going to happen in the midterms? What's going to happen in 24? Is there a change in America's commitment to Norway, to Europe, to NATO? Of course, I've assured them we're in this for the long run. Putin has done one thing. He has unified the Europeans. Norway was always there, but with Sweden and Finland and many other countries, I've never seen Europe so unified as it is today.
I gave a talk at the university today, and my host, the professor, has her PhD from the University of Virginia, and her field of expertise is US exceptionalism. And she was telling her students that the time of American exceptionalism may have come to an end, and that we're entering a new phase in American history. And the students and the professors were very concerned about this. You will get to meet her because I've invited her. She'll be in Los Angeles in the fall, so we're going to have her speak to the Pacific Council.
Right.
So, but it's a very good and disturbing question. Sam, next.
Thank you. Madeline Bladaru would like to know, what are the perspectives for enhanced cooperation within NATO and bilaterally between the US, the Nordic countries, and Central and Eastern European allies?
It's quite complicated question, because one of the difference between the Nordic countries, with the exception of Iceland, as I said, which is very small, and they have a Coast Guard type of thing, but they do not have a military. The Nordic countries all have militaries and equipment. If you combine just Sweden, Finland, and Norway, they have 300 fighter jets among them. I mean, that's a sizable Air Force combined. And that may or may not include Denmark, I can't remember. But the point is that when you talk about the Eastern European countries, that brings a whole different element, even though many are in NATO, but their armed forces are not up to the same technology par as Britain, the United States, Canada, Norway, where we're talking very similar technology, training, armed forces, and so forth. But I think because of the Ukraine and because of Putin, those countries will rapidly upgrade their military forces as well. And Europe will be a very poignant and united front for NATO.
Sam, next question, please.
Next question from Rob Bonner. Congratulations, Mark, on your appointment. Any chance of a presidential visit to Norway?
Well, Rob, maybe you know something that I don't know. We would hope so, but you never know. The Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, as you all know, most of the Nobel Prizes are all in Sweden, but the Peace Prize is in Norway and always has been by Alfred Nobel's will. And so we think we'll have some very, maybe not the president, but high-level U.S. well-known visitors coming for the Peace Prize. And we look forward to it, because I think there's nothing more important on this planet other than global warming concerns than peace.
Sam, next question.
Nick Plummer asks, do you see Norway re-embracing fossil fuels over the short term like other European nations?
Norway is in a very similar position on this than the United States, but Norway goes to its own path on this. It comes to its own conclusions, and they are very, very sensitive about the environment. I think we will see more oil, more gas, but it will be near the existing wells. They are very sensitive about the environment, and they will do it very cautiously. But I think because of the pressures that Putin has put on Europe, that there is a need for all countries, including the United States and LNG, et cetera, to do more in this area. Unfortunately, and I attended the energy conference not too long ago, the ONS, and one of the big concerns by all the European energy companies were there is the long time it takes regulation to go forward. To put up a wind farm in many of countries, including Norway, including the United States, is a 10-year process. Well, we can't wait 10 years for alternate sources of energy.
Sam, next question, please.
Those are all the questions in the queue at this time, Jerry. So if you have any additional questions for the ambassador, maybe it can prompt more from the audience.
I think we're going to gradually wind it up, but I just want to give an example, which the ambassador knows about, of California, Norway relations, that on Friday, the Hilton Humanitarian Award is being given to the Norwegian Refugee Council. The director of the council, I'm sure, is on a plane on his way to Los Angeles now. Nobody in Norway knew about it except him. Nobody in California I don't know. This is like this best kept secret. But it's sort of, I don't know if Maggie Miller is on the call. She's one of our members and she runs the Hilton Humanitarian Award. But it's just an example of the relationship between California and Norway, and one of many and more now that we have one of our fellow Californians as ambassador here. Pacific Council will be sending a delegation to Oslo to meet with Ambassador Nathanson and his country team and others. That's one of the things I'm doing, is setting up meetings while I'm here. And so this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So the ambassador's had a long day, I can tell. It's the end of his work day here. It's already 6 o'clock. So I think I'm gonna, Sam, has anything filtered in? I don't want to.
One final last question from Adam, which feels a light one to end on. What are your favorite?
All right, perfect. This wouldn't be Adam Nathanson, would it?
Yeah, yes, indeed. What are your
All right,
favorite
Adam, we're going to
things?
give you the last word.
What are your
Yeah,
favorite things to
that's
do in Oslo?
Sorry, we missed
No
the
worries.
question.
What are your favorite things to do in Oslo?
Your favorite?
Well, you know, this is a great country for sports. You saw in the Winter Olympics, Norway won more gold medals than any country. People are very athletic here. People are very friendly here. And one of the shocks is if you go to the park and you have young children, 6, 8 years old, the parents leave them in the park and they go for a hike, and an hour later they come back. Kids are perfectly safe. Other people are watching the kids. Now, that's not my favorite thing to do here, but it's quite different than in other cities. Jane and I have really liked the emerging art community here. There's a brand new museum, the largest in Scandinavia. There's a fabulous opera and ballet, and we've enjoyed that. And our big surprise has really been the quality of the food and the cuisine. We have found it very interesting. The other thing that's very surprising, again, it's not my favorite thing to do, but in talking to high school students in Norway, they know more about American politics, I'm afraid to say, than most American high school students know about their own politics on a very, very high level. So there's lots to do here. It's a great place to visit. Now, winter is coming, so it's a little different. The Norwegians don't mind it. They are outdoors in all types of weather, but we'll see how Californians do in the winter. But we look forward to having all of you visit. Adam was just on a bike ride a month ago with Thor, the Norwegian world champion, and it's great bike riding country for those of you who want to do it. Again, the Norwegians don't do a great marketing job of saying all the opportunities, all the places, not just Oslo, but throughout the Arctic, the Lofton Islands, Bergen, the West Coast, different places. There's so much to see, and the scenery is fabulous here. So I encourage all of you to come to Norway.
Wonderful. I want to thank Yvonne Albion, who is sitting on the other side of the computer from the public affairs office at the embassy, who made this happen.
She's a real star.
She is a real star. And Nastasha and Sam and Valerie and all of our staff, thank you all for joining us. Ambassador Nathan, it's now almost 6 o'clock. Thank you for ending a very long day with us. We appreciate it. Thank you all. We're going to end our session now. Bye-bye.